taping this for TV, so if you're here with somebody you shouldn't be here with, slink out of here now. Everyone having a good time? Pretty cool event, isn't it? Hello, everyone. I am Sabine Simonson. I'm the Outreach Services and Volunteer Coordinator for the Talbot County Free Library. And on behalf of all of us, the whole staff, I want to welcome you to this world premiere. Bill Peake's novel is out after 10 years. Yay! Bill Peake! He was working here so hard, that's why it took him so long. It is my great privilege to work with Bill. He's the handsome one, I'm the cute one. Together, we are Bill and Sabina. I'd like to introduce you to Sue Ellen Thompson, who is a great friend of both of ours. She's a Pulitzer Prize nominated poet, and she will introduce Bill and tell you so much more about him, more than you ever want to know. Here is Sue Ellen Thompson.
Thank you. Thank you, Sabina. When I first visited the Eastern Shore, this was a little more than 10 years ago, because my husband had a consulting job in St. Michael's. We were invited to a dinner party at which I was seated next to Bill Peake and discovered that he was a writer. The next day, a frigid one, remember that?
Yes.
I think it was 14 is the temperature that sticks in my mind. Bill was assigned the task of entertaining the spouse while my husband was doing his business, and it was too cold to sightsee and it was too icy to walk around St. Michael's. So he took me to the Blue Crab Coffee House. By the time that cup of coffee had stretched into lunch, we discovered that the Blue Crab wouldn't take credit cards. He emptied his pockets, I emptied my purse, and I think, wasn't it $23? Something like that. We had $23 between us. And I know this is something only two writers can appreciate, but with that $23, we managed to finance a conversation that extended through most of the afternoon. As many of you who have encountered him either through reading his column in the Star Democrat or by asking for his help and advice here in the library are already aware, Bill knows how to talk about books and writing. He mentioned something to me about working on a novel, and I made a mental note to keep tabs on him and his project. What I didn't know back then was that Bill already had a master's degree from the prestigious creative writing program at Hollins University, nor did I know that he would be working on that book for a decade, or that I would end up moving down here, or that we would become such close friends that we had to move our ongoing conversation about writing from coffee at the Blue Crab to drinks, and I think we even went into dinner a couple of times out of the fire. When I finally got up the nerve to ask him if I could read that by now finished novel, I had no idea of the breadth of his knowledge or the beauty of his prose. The Oblate's confession takes us back to 7th century England. I will let Bill give you the context for his reading tonight, but let me say this much. I had to read it twice, once for the intricacies of character and plot, and then again for the pure pleasure of his writing. I think we are very fortunate to live in a community that supports a free public library and writers like Bill, and I know that after the reading he will be happy to sign copies of the book that we're all here to celebrate tonight. So please turn off your cell phones, okay? And join me in welcoming our very own library guy, Bill Peake.
Thank you all. Thank you all. And I was afraid nobody was going to come. Gee, I'm kind of overwhelmed. This is amazing. Thank you all very much. And thank you, Sue Ellen. I want you to know that during the years when I was afraid I would never find a publisher for the Oblate's Confession, I think I would have lost all hope and gone out into the woods to live as a hermit myself had it not been for the fact that Sue Ellen Thompson, a poet of vast skill and endless imagination, had read and liked my manuscript. It gave me hope. I carried on because of her. I owe her big time. And just so you'll know, I owe you all big time too. I owe every single one of you. It was thanks to this place, the Talbot County Free Library, and the reading I did in it over a 10-year period, long before I came to work here, that I found the knowledge and fluency necessary to write the Oblate's Confession. This building exists because our community believes in itself. That is why we support a library. This building exists because of you, which means in no small way each and every one of you contributed to the creation of my novel. From the bottom of my heart, I thank you. Let me begin by giving you a little introduction to the book before I read from it. The Oblate's Confession, as Sue Ellen told you, is set in the second half of the 7th century A.D., the so-called Dark Ages. At this time, it was a fairly common practice for families to donate one of their children to a monastery, with the understanding that that child would then spend the rest of his life there and grow up to become a monk. Such a child was called an oblate. My novel is narrated by an elderly monk who, at the end of his life, is coming to grips with the fact that when he was a child, an oblate, he committed a terrible sin. For his penance, his abbot has ordered him to write out an account of that childhood. Hence the title of my book, The Oblate's Confession, and the act of remembering that is its story. Finally, to help you better understand what you're about to hear, a little vocabulary is in order. In the monastery in which my oblate grows up, indeed in most monasteries even today, every morning at a set time the monks hold a meeting, a sort of staff meeting, in which they make plans for the day and for the coming weeks, plans both practical and spiritual. This daily meeting is always opened with a reading of a chapter from the Rule of St. Benedict, the rule the monks follow. For this reason, the meeting itself is called chapter. All monks are duty-bound to attend the daily chapter meeting. The dining hall in a monastery is called a refectory. There's going to be a test after this, by the way. In the monastery at Redstone, the monastery in my novel, the monks hold their daily chapter meeting in the refectory. The monks' dormitory is called the dortoir. At Redstone, a pretty nice latrine. Back home in Kentucky, we'd call it a four-holer. Extends out from the side of the dortoir. Such a latrine in a 7th century monastery would have been called the rear dorte, or sometimes, appropriately enough, the necessarium. Latin can be so expressive, can't it? At the beginning of the brief section I'm going to read you tonight, my narrator, the old monk, has just finished recalling his earliest memories of Redstone, where, for all intents and purposes, he has now lived his entire life. Hi, Meredith. Sorry, I just saw somebody in the back. Gosh, all these wonderful people, all these sweet people. I can't believe you all came. Gosh. Okay, I'm going to try to do this with a microphone because I'm losing my voice. There are, of course, other memories from that first year at Redstone, though Father Dagan, whoops, wrong chapter, huh? Can you believe it? Hurry up. Ignore that. I thought, that's not the way this chapter began. I have other memories from those first years. I could, I suppose, fill an entire book with such childish remembrances, but so could many others, and I write under obedience. Father Abbot has ordered me to give an account of the events that led up to my sin. And so I move now to a day, perhaps a year or two later, when I receive my first inkling of the role I would someday be called to fill, the mission I would so basely abuse. By that time, there were 4 of us. I came first. No one, not even Waldhair, would deny that. When we Oblates marched into church, I stood at the head of our little line. But in truth, if not in precedence, Waldhair came first. He was the oldest among us, and, at least for a while, the tallest as well. Not surprisingly, then, it was he who led us that day, all eyes and expectation, out onto the garth, pointed us toward the mystery that would, in time, lead to the writing of this account. which is not to say that it was Waldhair's fault. No, of course it wasn't. The fault was mine. I do not claim otherwise. You know, I wonder now what he told us. It can't have been much. Waldhair would have understood next to nothing of what he had seen. A secret, then, a hint, the suggestion of something marvelous, and we would have followed him out to the edge of the terrace, followed him to the edge of the world for that matter, followed him because he was Waldhair, and we always followed him, followed him because those secrets may be common in a community that keeps the silence. Few of any consequence are known to oblates. Though I loved Waldhair, though I loved and revered and at times wanted to be Waldhair, still there was a part of me that resented Waldhair. I was first. I had lived at Redstone longer than any of them, could tell stories of a time before the Abbot's Lodge, before the dortoir, before even the rear dorte, and so, doubtless, a part of me would have resented that excursion as well, would have resented the ease with which Waldhair had taken command, the impertinence of it, the implied reproof. It would have been like me to have said something. It would have been like me to have, in this if nothing else, taken the lead, been first to break the silence. Such a surprise! Here it is morning, and behold, the sun rises. Waldhair ignored me. Like a grown-up, like one of the exalted personages that ruled over our lives, Waldhair ignored me, leaned out over the edge of the terrace, cast a long, self-important glance down toward the ditch. But there was nothing there. Grassy banks, the abbey path, certainly nothing to warrant my attention. I looked back out at the fields, the village beyond. The sun had already reached the wheat, turning its surface into something soft, rosy, a gentle relief of the ground hidden beneath. Among the peas, the sparrows had begun their day as well, bickering as they gleaned. But the village still lay in shadow, the sunny tops of the far wood rising from the haze of its cook smoke like something in a dream, something conjured up, hardly real. Look! It was Aelmund, and he was pointing toward the village. I shaded my eyes against the sun, but at first could see nothing. Then the figure of a man detached itself from the shadows, waded out into the wheat. I glanced over at Waldhair, but was not surprised to find him uninterested. This was not the secret. With little else to do, I watched as the man made his way obliquely across the field. Twice he stopped and knelt down as if looking for something. When he did this, the surface of the wheat seemed to swallow him whole, only the dark line of his progress through the dew remaining to tell you where he had to be. Each time he reemerged, head and shoulders rising suddenly into the light, I found myself pleased, as if I had both predicted and then personally performed something of a miracle. Presently, the man worked his way over to the ditch. With an exaggerated step, he leapt to the other side. I expected him to turn back then toward the village, or maybe walk up toward the abbey, but he ignored the path altogether and continued on into the tall grass beyond, which told me where he was going. Should someone run to the refectory? Should someone tell the brothers? Should I? 2 ducks rose squawking from the nearer of the ponds and flew out over the village toward the river. The man seemed only mildly surprised by the ducks. He watched as they turned over the meal, flying east into the cover provided by the far wood. As if in some obscure way he approved of the course taken by the ducks, the man gave a quick nod in their direction and then, turning back toward the pond, began a series of elaborate gestures that made him look like a monk talking with his hands. But of course he wasn't a monk, and he wasn't talking with his hands. He was pulling a net from his blouse. The 4 of us stood up as tall as we could, but it made no difference. The man knew perfectly well where the community was at that time of day, that he need not worry about the abbey, and of course we could not yell. Some secret, a poacher. Waldhair shook his head, but I could tell he was beginning to have doubts himself, which disappointed me. Though I hadn't wanted him to succeed, I also didn't want him to fail. I wanted to see something I hadn't seen before. I wanted to learn a secret. I looked back toward the village. There were mothers in those houses, mothers and fathers and their children. And somewhere south of here there was a house like these, a house that held my family, or at least my father. I was Winweed, son of Chelwolf, and Waldhair couldn't say that. Aelmund and Offor couldn't say that. No matter how many aunts and uncles they had, everyone knew they were really only orphans. I was the only real oblate. There he is, said Waldhair, and even as he said it, we saw him, saw the monk emerge from behind the terrace wall, continue on his way down the abbey path. Though he shaded his eyes against the sun, the man made no attempt to disguise his walk. Brother Eilfhelm, said Offor gravely. Then, apparently unsure of the importance of this, added, "He's probably just going to work in the peas." During chapter? It was, of course, impossible. And immediately I loved Waldhair again. How had he found this out? How could anyone have discovered anything so wonderful? "Oh, he'll get a beating now," said Aelmund, who liked beatings. "No, he won't. He goes every week." I looked at Waldhair. "He does, every Sabbath." And for some reason I believed him. Not, I think, because Waldhair was believable or it made sense, but because it wasn't. Because it was impossible, incredible, and therefore in absolute keeping with what I watched. A grown man, one of the brothers, perfectly healthy and, so far as I knew, in complete possession of his faculties, was walking down the Abbey path right in the middle of chapter. And what was more, he was doing so without subterfuge. When he crossed over the ditch bridge and turned back toward us, the sun behind him now, eyes raised, he made no attempt to pull his hood up or avert his face. Anyone could have seen him. Anyone could have known. But then again, they couldn't, could they? They were all in chapter. And would a villager report such a thing if he saw it? Would a villager even recognize such behavior as wrong? Villagers didn't come to faults. Villagers weren't allowed in chapter. How would anyone ever know? Ælfhelm regained the terrace wall, threw a glance up at the abbot's lodge, turned and began to walk along the base of the wall toward the river, toward us. "It's all right," whispered Waldhair. "He doesn't look up." We all held our breath. Ælfhelm passed beneath us. Without looking up, Ælfhelm passed beneath us and then, crossing himself absently, passed beneath the church. We all breathed again. Then, just as we were beginning to feel comfortable, Ælfhelm did something completely unexpected. Instead of turning back east and following the river down toward the village, he stepped out onto Wilfrid's bridge. "He's going for wood," whispered Offor, and just as quickly, Waldhair whispered back, "Without a cart?" "But I like Brother Ælfhelm. I like his stories." "Too bad," said Waldhair. "He's going anyway." And he was. Without even stopping to think about it, Ælfhelm crossed the bridge and walked right into the belly of the great North Wood. Of course, there was quite a debate after that. The four of us stood at the end of the garth and argued the case like four old farmers arguing over a cow. Each of us sure he was right, sure he was the one who knew what Ælfhelm was up to. Not that it really mattered. Apostate or spy, the man had broken the rule. One of the adults, one of the spotless ones, had a spot, a secret, and we all now knew it. For weeks after that, I thought about Ælfhelm, pictured him as he made his way down the Abbey path, past beneath the refectory window. I can imagine what it would be like, the sounds that would come from that window, the voices, maybe Prior Dagon asking a question, Father Abbot clearing his throat, saying something you couldn't quite hear. It was pleasant lying in bed and thinking about that, picturing Brother Ælfhelm, secure in the knowledge that he, and he alone, would suffer the consequences of his actions. Many's the night I drifted off dreaming of trespass and the great North Wood. Would you like a little more? Things are about to take a bad turn. I suppose the bad times really began with the furnace master's speech. I mean, when people think about the bad times, if they allow themselves to think about them at all, that is probably what they think of first, the speech, the fact that it was the furnace master who told them what was going to happen. Indeed, I sometimes wonder if that was the beginning of Victricius's own personal bad times as well. It makes sense. No one likes to hear such news, and especially not from a foreigner. But I write under obedience. I must record only what I can attest to, and I cannot attest to this. I was still too young for chapter then. I never heard the famous speech. No, when I remember the bad times, I think not of the furnace master, but of the little one, a poor little Offor. And not for the reasons you think. I remember Offor not for what he became, but for what he was, the boy I knew, the living, breathing child. That was a wet year. The rains came early that spring and continued well into the haying. When it rained hard, we knelt in church and prayed for better weather. And when it rained less hard, we pulled our hoods up, gave thanks to God, and marched out into the peas, our woolens still weighted with the previous day's mud. By the end of that summer, there were brothers whose feet were so swollen and white from the damp, it was said they looked more like fish than feet. Brother Thunberg lost some toes. Still, when I think of that year, the end of that summer, I think first not of bad weather, but of good, of a day that dawned so bright and clear, it seems now to mock all that came after. I remember colors, turf, lichen, moss. I remember a high, blue, almost winter sky. I remember Offor. Offor stands in the angle created by sanctuary and apse, russet walls steaming at his back, sunlight everywhere, sparkling. The boy raises an arm. He must have been wearing woolens too big for him, for in my memory, as he raises his arm, the opposite shoulder, frail, bony, white, always slips incongruously from the neck of his garment. He smiles, as if embarrassed, as if unsure of the importance of what he has to show me. Offor smiles. It's a squirrel, a dead squirrel. Offor is standing in the angle created by sanctuary and apse, and he is holding a dead squirrel up by its tail. The thing hangs in the air by Offor's left ear, its eyes caked, useless, perfect little feet clutching at nothing. And then, always, whether I like it or not, a second memory intrudes upon the first. This time we are in the rear dorte, and I am feeling disappointed. Despite myself, despite conscience, the horror of what Offor has shown me, I am thinking of myself, realizing that I've been tricked, betrayed, that this had nothing to do with food, that I shall not be gorging myself anytime soon on illicit